Okay, we are recording. So welcome everyone on this lovely, wet, dark Monday evening in November. I will call this meeting to order. And are there any changes or additions to the agenda?
I think we're okay on our end.
Okay, that sounds good. Because we have enough to, I think, to discuss with this agenda. And public comments on items not related to the agenda.
It's a quiet group.
Hearing none, seeing none. We move on to the minutes. I'll take a motion to approve the minutes from October 26th and our meeting on November 17th.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Did we lose you, Amy? No, we got Amy. I heard that.
Yeah, I shut my camera off for a moment.
I'll second that.
So who made the motion?
Scott. Second.
No, I seconded.
Scott seconded. Who made the motion? Colleen?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Okay.
Are there any changes, additions, clarifications?
No.
Hearing none. All those in favor, in favor of approving the minutes from October 26th and November 17th, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any who oppose?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay, and Elizabeth, you raised your hand?
No, I don't have a comment. I just was raising my hand to say aye.
Ah, okay, gotcha. Thank you. And just one abstention, thank you. Okay. Wow, we are just moving on to the core of our meeting, and that is the fiscal year 22 supervisory union budget. And I think at some point, like 11:30 this morning, Ed sent out some Excel information. I'm afraid I was at work and did not see it until about 6 o'clock this afternoon or this evening. So I have not had an opportunity to go over it.
Yeah, I think we can go through it here tonight. Yeah, I mean, the part of the problem was the holiday, and Ed was still getting information. As I said in my email today on Friday, he and I did not get a chance to review it until this morning, so that's why it didn't go out till earlier today.
Yeah.
There are not many major changes from what we presented before, but we could certainly go over that. I think it might be best. There was also something in here about a tech department. Larry was going to maybe present, but we could have Ed go over the budget, and then if we have specific questions or Larry wants to share more detail about his tech budget, that's fine. But how does everybody feel about that? And Ed, I would just highlight those changes since the last time we met. Has everybody got it in front of them?
No.
Because I can
I
pull it
will
up.
in a moment.
I can pull it up and show my screen.
Yeah,
The one with general fund at the top.
It should say general fund at the top, right? And then it's got down at the bottom, it's got tab general fund 1001, then early childhood. It says 2025, but I think Ed means 2022. And we're not projecting that far in the future. And then the assessments is the third tab. I can pull it up on here. just so we can all see what we're talking about here. This should do it.
David, I would appreciate Ed doing just an overview, just because this is sort of new to me, and there are some things I didn't understand. So I would appreciate if Ed can do some minor overview, and also maybe just point out some lines that really we may need to pay attention to. I think that's important.
Is that, Ed, do you want to do that? I've got the general fund budget up on the screen, Ed, expenditures.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd be happy to. I mean, if we go, first of all, it's the three tabs that you got. The general fund, it says general fund 1001. And then it says early childhood 2025. Those are fund numbers. Those aren't years.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Okay. So they're 4-digit numbers that signify what fund the money is. And I put them on there because the general fund and the early childhood fund are separate. So that's why they're that designation. But if we start with the general fund, in the general fund, there are two assessments lie in the general fund: the central office assessment and the special ed assessment. So what makes up the central office assessment starts with the improvement of instruction, which is where Angie is. Angie's in charge of curriculum for the district. And the portion, the $46,000 that you see there in wages, that is for a portion of her salary, about half of her salary. No, I think it's 60% of her salary. The rest of her salary is paid through the CFP grant, which is the Consolidated Federal Program, or probably more familiar to you is the title grants. If you go down through that, you'll get down to $20,000. That's purchase professional services. That $20,000 is for, David had called me Friday and said that the board had asked to put in money for work to be done to align curriculums with the
Strategic plan.
So that was an addition to the budget. You keep going down, the $55,000 is for software related to curriculum. Some of that software, is Angie on the line?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Yeah. Well, so Angie, can you just give us a quick overview, like 3 or 4 of the software packages that are in that $55,000?
Yes, I sure can. So our software budget moved into the curriculum budget last year. We realized that there were a lot of things that teachers were asking for that related to their curriculum, and I also had a concern about our software budget duplicating. We had subscriptions to similar products that weren't, and so because of that we weren't using certain things as to the greatest extent possible. So this is the kind of thing that I'm working on this year and next year, since it really is this year that is the first year that teachers have had to request software through me. And so the kinds of things that we've spent those dollars on this year is we do have a program called Teach Point that we use in 3 of our 4 schools for helping principals do staff evaluations. So it houses all that paperwork, and it's a communication tool and basically a repository for the documents that go along with our staff, with our teacher evaluation. The other thing that we have spent it on is a program called MobiMax. That is like a general curriculum program. And then we also have a program called Exact Path that I've used grant funds, and this is the first year that I've used local funds as well to provide this program to all of our schools. It is a diagnostic, and then it establishes a learning pathway in language arts, math, and reading. Other things that we've purchased, IXL, it's similar to MobiMax, but only a few teachers wanted that program. We have a variety of other programs that we buy, just like only a few people want them. So I kind of work with individuals or groups of teachers that want them. Seesaw is a learning management system that we purchased for our K through 5th grade teachers, and currently the teachers can opt to use that, but they also made a decision in some of the schools to only use that with their K4, and then VT, VLC, our other curriculum we didn't pay for. So does anybody have any questions about that?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yes, I do. So let me just clarify here. This software line is for software that is curriculum based.
Yes, so
And
it's not for like Power School, because that is our student information system.
Okay, so then Larry's software line is for everything else.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So those are the lines that are for curriculum development in the local budget. I think those are the two ones, as Rebecca had asked me to highlight two of the areas. So those two I'd highlight. As we move down into technology for instruction, that's where Larry and his 5 techs are. So you can see the wage lines and
4 techs.
4 techs, I'm sorry, 4 techs. So Larry and 4 techs. And then down below, you could start to see some of the, you could start with technology for 10,000, repair and maintenance, and then communications for 81,600. And then as you go down to general supplies, technology software, and other equipment, those are lines that Larry put together, and I will defer to Larry right now to give us a quick overview of the communications on down.
Yeah, I can give an overview. So if you look at the first line, the K line on David's screen, that is fiscal year what, 20?
Right.
Right.
Second to last line is fiscal year 21, and then the end line is fiscal year 22. And as you notice over those 3 years, basically the gist of the differences in the budget is if you look at the total for the department, it goes 773 back in fiscal year 20, and then 778. We've gone up about 5,000 in 3 years. A lot of that is because, as you can see, other equipment, which was line K48, was 177. That was the first year, and some of you were still on the board then, that we put all the capital equipment for technology at the SU, and the theory was that we could lower costs, and we did. It's gone from 177 to 145. So that's a big, sorry, 177 to 131 is what we're asking for next year. Now you notice software is a big spike up. It's up because there was a lot of things we bought that were COVID related, and now we're building a budget for next year in the assumption that we're going to keep some of this software. The teachers like it, the superintendent likes it. We want to keep the software. So those are things like the expanded G Suite for Enterprise, DocuSign. We signed a contract with Lightspeed Classroom, which is what allows teachers to see even remotely what students' browsing history and what they're doing. Additional outdoor access points. We bought a lot of access points, if you remember back in the spring. Now, a lot of this stuff that we bought in this fiscal year is going to be covered under some federal monies that was COVID related, but we can't assume that's going to be there next year. So we had to budget for it. And that's why you see, and that's with $9,000 being cut out when we're still at 1. But again, the main thing I would, again, bring to light is, if you look at fiscal year 20, we were at 773 for the department, and now we're at 778. And that's with putting all the software and equipment back in fiscal year 20 in the technology department. I can share my screen if people want to see what I shared with the SU budget committee we had last time. It's up to you guys.
How much money do you think the COVID related software, how much of that is the COVID related software?
I would say almost all of the increase. Most of the
46.
Yeah, so the difference would be approximately $47,000, $45,000.
Yeah, some of these are expensive.
And why is FY21 55? That's my only
Because
question.
so what happened was, this was pre-COVID, right? We built the budget this time last year. We didn't budget for Lightspeed Classroom for every single kid. It was only certain grades. We didn't budget for DocuSign. We didn't budget for G Suite Enterprise for Education. We didn't budget for the additional outdoor access points in the software that they for the subscriptions for that. So that's why that's pre-COVID. Also, in addition, the reason why it's from 92 to 55, that's because we moved a lot of it to Angie's budget, which you just saw. So the SU board decided last year.
I figured it moved. I just wasn't sure where.
Yeah, it's not new money. We just moved the money. The difference between 92 and 101, that is new money. That's post-COVID. If we get a federal grant and somehow, that would be great. But
so really, it's 8,000 or so.
If you compare, which is why, and I can show you, David, you want me to do this? If I,
yeah, I can stop sharing if you want to share that.
Give me 1 second. Here we go. Can everybody see this?
Hold on. Let me, yeah, you got it.
All right. So if you look at the difference, so these are the main lines that I'm in charge of. Supplies, repairs, and maintenance, software, and equipment. And then I subtotal them here. And then I put the total tech department, which includes benefits, salaries, et cetera, out here. And if you look at it, the difference over 3 years, we're up $5,000, less than 1% a year. And that's what a lot of it is. Also, while I'm on the screen, I just want to show you what I showed the SU board who was on the last meeting, the budget committee. The number of tickets have gone up significantly. So we started out 3,100 in fiscal year 18. We've gone up 39% over 3 years. And now again, COVID, you would assume that our tickets would go up because now we're not just supporting kids when they're in the classroom and then a little bit after school. We're now supporting them all the time, 24/7 for their learning. And then also another thing to look at is if we just look at July, November. So I just ran the ticket count. We're up 51% over 4 years. A lot of this for fiscal year 21, our current fiscal year, is I think due to Canvas and VTVLC. I mean, I haven't broken them out. I can, but I bet you that's more than the difference. It's probably 400 or 500 tickets we've done just of Kansas VTVLC.
Amy, I'm not sure if you can see the screen, but Nikki had her hand up and then Kristen.
Well, I'm sorry. Bill first had his hand up.
Okay.
And then Kristen and then Nikki.
Perfect.
Yep. Okay,
So
thank
Bill?
you. So, Larry, do you anticipate any lowering of the software cost when the change happens? I mean, I understand that teachers may like certain software, but that doesn't necessarily mean that when COVID goes away, it's going to be as useful as it is now. I mean, what's the one? LifeSpeak? It was the one you were talking about.
LifeSpeak Classroom's one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's an expensive software, isn't it?
Yeah, it's expensive. It's not as it's expensive. It's the teachers would really appreciate that. Again, what LifeSpeak does, it allows them so they could be teaching and they can see all their kids' tabs. They can lock them down to a tab. They can close a tab they shouldn't be on. It's a very powerful software. Whether or not it's up for the bang for the buck is something we can definitely look at. I agree.
Right.
In the post-COVID world, vaccines are out. We're back to normal school, whatever that means. I think we'll definitely look at lowering costs, just like we have with the capital equipment. If you see our capital equipment's gone down 40% over 3 years, I'd love to do the same thing with software. I'm in no way upset with the tech budget. I think you've done a great job. At the same time, I understand why the software budget has gone up. Well, take DocuSign, for example. DocuSign's relatively expensive. If we decide in a post-COVID world that it's not a priority and LifeSpeak Classroom is, then we'll make those adjustments based on David's input and the board's input out. So yeah, there's nothing, and by again, like I said, this was cutting out $9,000 a unified classroom. It was even higher originally, and we did that because a lot of teachers don't use unified classroom for the LMS side. They're using Google Classroom, they're using Seesaw from Angie, and they're using VTVLC's Canvas for their LMS. It's like the least used LMS, and we're paying for that. So that's one of those things where we made that choice where it wasn't a priority for us, even in a COVID environment, when we have other LMSs that are free.
Yeah.
What are we paying for VTVLC, Larry?
Nothing.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Just more tickets. You're paying tax.
You're paying for it.
Yeah.
Well, as long as Larry's paying for it.
Okay, Kristen.
Hi, I just had a question, Larry, about if these numbers, like, do these include, because I know the like funds that are E-ratable, like, does this include like internet, like, is that like, and I just had a question if anybody knew like what our, because that's based on our poverty rate, like, is that per school or is that just the whole SU? Like, how do we?
It's the whole SU. The SU decided, I think 5 years ago maybe, to put all communications at the SU budget, which is what you see there at 81,000. It was 110,000. It's gone down to 80 because as we get new contracts and bits are always cheaper, we've been able to lower that cost. And when we go out to bid, which is what you're talking about, the E-rate process essentially is a bidding process where every 2 or 3 years we put out the bid, which is a 470 for E-rate and an RFP, and people bid and we get the best bid and then we decide, and we have an E-rate consultant that does all that. Okay. And basically what we do as far as E-rate is concerned, there's 2 ways to handle E-rate. You can budget less and then have them reimburse the vendor, and then the vendor will lower our monthly bill, right? The money's a wash. Or you can budget what it costs for the contract and then get reimbursed through E-rate the following year, kind of like special ed. The next year where you see the money. We've been doing it in this SU for at least 12, 13 years the latter way, which is we budget for it, the big number, because we don't know if E-rate's going to be around from year to year. We hope it is. And then when the money comes in, that's basically what I've been using for a lot of our switch upgrades, our wireless access points, all the infrastructure stuff around the schools has been 80–90% of it has been coming out of E-rate, not out of the capital equipment budget, which is how I've been able to lower that capital equipment budget by $40,000–$50,000. It's because Uncle Sam has been picking up all the non-Chromebook related items that I've been buying.
And so ours still, like the SU, but that's still, they base that off of our poverty rate, right? Like as a whole SU?
Yeah, there's a similar to special ed, there's a calculation based on the SU's poverty rate, all combined, and they based on what we report out to the state, And then there's a formula where if you have higher poverty, you get more of a reimbursement. If you have lower poverty, you get less of a reimbursement.
Do we know what this is like pre E-rate, you said, right? So do we know like what the difference is in our?
Yeah, so
get back.
the SU has historically been getting anywhere between 40 and 60% off.
Mm-hmm.
Reimbursed, I should say. I shouldn't say off.
Right.
Getting reimbursed the following year.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Depending on the poverty rate.
And let me see, I see Rebecca, and then after you, Bill, and I don't know, Nikki, if you still wanted to ask a question.
Well, I just, I don't want to ask a question because Bill pretty much hit Larry with all of my thoughts. Bill and I were on the same page. But I did want to just highlight that while it appears that our software is going down, it's our technology software, our total software line is still, well, it has gone up dramatically. And so I don't want to have, I guess I'm concerned about keeping some of the COVID related software. I'm not in 22 because I think there's enough uncertainty, but long-term, it does worry me that some of it might not make sense. And I just wanted to highlight that we're not decreasing our budget. We're increasing it by about 50,000. So yeah. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Oh, she left. She hit the, she'll be back in. She must have hit the exit.
Yeah, she probably hit the.
They're both red, right? So if you're looking quickly.
Yeah. Okay, so Bill, and then Rebecca when she comes back.
Yeah, quick question, and this has to do with E-rate and the poverty rate, the poverty level. One thing I've noticed, because I supervise the direct cert free and reduced software, and I've noticed a downtick in the number of free and reduced applications from parents. Yeah. Because lunch is free. Yeah. And that concerns me. With have you seen the same thing?
Yeah. So yes, that's true, and it's a big problem, and it's something that I've been talking with the admin assistants about and trying to decide the best way to go about it. I think it might be best to get the admin team involved and try to do this. You know, kind of get the word out. You know, that just because it's free this year, you still should fill out the application if, you know, even if you're not sure if you qualify for free and reduced.
Yeah, you have some you know, you have some messaging blast capacity. Maybe it might be a good idea to create some sort of, you know, free ad campaign to start pushing out to parents saying, hey, you need to, because this is money. Yeah, this is money. Yeah,
I agree. It's a issue. It's something we've seen with the state reporting when I was working with the admin assistants, getting these numbers to the state, and so yes, I agree. It's a big issue. The good part about E-rate, I believe, is there is a floor. So it's not like even schools in no poverty, zero poverty, still get some E-rate.
But it also affects Title I and all that.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's a problem. On E-rate. Title I in special ed, you know, dwarf the E-rate reimbursement.
So it might even be good, kind of like when they were reminding people to participate in the census, that applying for the free reduced is more than just a meal. It's technology and other grant supported educational opportunities for our community. Rebecca and then Angie.
I just wanted to comment on you were speaking to, Bill, at the last seminar, budget seminar that I attended, that issue came up. We're not the only town, and they attribute the fact that many applications were not submitted to COVID, and students not being in school full time, and and just not having that audience at your fingertips. But they did encourage folks to try and find ways to reach out to the community, because it really is important for them to fill out those applications. But I wanted to also comment on, Larry, what you had said earlier about the purchase of certain software for teachers, and some of it is COVID related. I think that if the program is helping teachers identify students, different ways that students are being engaged, I think that will be really valid in terms of keeping those sort of programs on our budget, although they may be costly. But I think through COVID, I'm sure teachers will see that yes, there are lots of different ways where students will be engaged. And so I just think we want to just keep that in mind as we're moving forward, and that is sort of paying attention to some of what teachers are seeing as a result of working under the restraints they're working under as a result of COVID. So yeah. I can respect keeping it, just paying attention to it, but not being quick to say, you know, COVID is not going to be around and let's get rid of it.
I think that's a good point, Rebecca. This is David, and I think the types of software that we would be able to eliminate would be more of the managerial central office type, like the DocuSign, right? When we're no longer all working from home and we can actually physically sign documents again, which we're starting to do now. But that DocuSign did come in handy with things like teacher contracts when teachers were home, right? But I think the instructional software that you're talking about, I think, you know, we've learned a lot about the technology capabilities of those softwares, and I wouldn't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and so yes, I think from what I'm hearing from the board is separately is a concern of the difference over year, and the hope that as we wind down COVID, we can wind down these numbers. And I feel confident that that's going to be possible, like David said, about DocuSign. The other question was about long-term contracts on some of these softwares. Some of them are and some of them aren't. So for example, AeroHive is not, that's the access points for the AP, but they're kind of useless without it. So it is a year to year, but we plan on keeping these access points for many years. So that'll stick around. DocuSign, I believe, was a 2-year. So that could come off, you know, if our first year was this year and then next year's the second year, I could look into if that's something the board wanted to do, we could look at eliminating that right there. And that's DocuSign is $4,000. You know, G Suite Enterprise for Education, there was a lot of you know, that's $6,000. So that's the recording of meetings and a bunch of other features that Google has been coy about whether or not they're going to make that part of the free education version of G Suite. So not knowing what was going to happen when it ran out in December 1st or November 15th, whatever the day was, I went to David and I said, I think we need to buy this because it's going to run out, and we use Google Meet all the time, and here are the features it gives us. Who knows what Google's going to do with that a year from now? That's not a multi-year deal, I believe. That should be a 1-year shot. So that next year, I think, if we didn't want those extra features, we could get rid of that, or maybe find a way to get half of it if I can work with a reseller. If maybe I can assign it just to the administrators and people who record meetings more often, you know, or something like that. You know, I could find a way around it. So there is room to try to find once COVID winds down, but I try not to enter into any long-term contracts I'm not going to say there are none. For example, our website, but that's not new for this year. That's a long-term contract. That's final site. Everything else is mostly year to year. So there is room. I want to tell, you know, to answer Mark's question, the question in the chat, that no, there's not. There might be one or two contracts, but none of them are long term. And it's not all the software. It's only a couple pieces, like DocuSign.
Great, thank you. Nancy, you have your hand up.
Hi, Nancy, I think you're muted.
Absolutely, yes, thanks. At Albert Bridge, at least, people were told not to send in applications for free and reduced. So I don't know if it happened at other schools, but that's something you needed to know, so that could be reversed.
Yeah, that was the, yeah, I don't know how that message got out there, but that would not be a good message. And it might be time, you know, like we do have the email blast capabilities with the applications. Larry and I can work on getting something out to everybody that indicates they really need to fill out those applications.
Maybe it might be also a good idea to incorporate some artistic ability of the high school students to create an ad campaign to express, you know, drawings and to express why this is important for the towns and for the school districts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Angie?
So I just want to talk about a situation that occurred 2 years ago with Albert Bridge, and it was the year that you didn't have a lunch program, so the lunch forms were not collected, and there was an impact in terms of what we could offer them through the consolidated federal program. So there might have been some parameters around that, Nancy. I'm not sure exactly what the idea behind that was. We did put numbers. I mean, when Larry did the state report for FY21, when he did it last year, it's all based on October numbers from the previous year. Albert Bridge is hovering, what, about 15–18% for the poverty rate. So, but a couple years ago, that was up over 30%. So it can be very volatile. So I would say that we, and I know that we learned a lot from that, and that we really pushed making sure that those forms were provided and that it was easier to fill out. And I'm not sure if Craig was even able to get it through his, through the same program that he uses for lunch. And Larry, you may know or may not know that, but we were trying to find a program that it would be seamless so that the applications didn't have to come into the school. They would be electronically sent right to the state.
Craig's working on that, and that's we're in the process of rolling that out. We switched vendors from Mealtime. It's not official yet. We haven't actually turned the plug to Mosaic, which is Craig has been lobbying for. It's a program that he's used to. Just to lift the veil, I know Bill knows this, but the way it works is when we do the state reports, basically I do them. Ryan used to do them, but I do them now. And then what I do is before I submit them to the state, I go back to the principals and just verify these free and reduced lunch percentage numbers based on what I'm seeing in Power School. And they all signed off on them this year that they were correct to the best of their knowledge. That way, because I don't know what's going on in the schools as far as each kid, that way if I send something to Weathersfield and it was off by 15–20%, BJ and Jean Marie would jump on it. So that's where we are with that. That's how that works.
I mean, there was ramifications for that too, because we had a mistake 2 years ago, and Weathersfield didn't get some funding based on that mistake. The ramifications of trying to correct it would have been worse than living with it, so we chose to live with it. But those forms are very important. So anyone listening to this, if you haven't filled one out, please do. It does. I mean, even though we take the count in October, it's never my question to you, Larry, was, is E-rate based on the October report, or does it go by a number at a different time?
It goes by the previous year's fiscal, so which is the fall report. The previous, so they don't, because E-rate doesn't know what it's going to be this year, right, until next year. So it's always 1 year off.
So it's the same way that the federal grant works.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody have any other questions about technology?
Scott?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to put in a quick plug for the software costs. I did, like Nikki saw, there is a pretty big jump, but so what I can share with the board is the importance of something like the electronic signature software. I guess Larry's calling it DocuSign. You know, I think that the Heartland board used that to get the warrant together last year, if my memory serves me right. And so that was, you know, that's timely. And this is an example, in my opinion, of costs that are hidden and that are unfairly borne by the community, or more specifically, directors. So being a Heartland warrant signer, I've been doing a lot of electronic signing, and that saves me a trip to town. And you know, $500 stipend before withholdings is not covering all the stuff that school directors do, any of us. So, I mean, that's just one little example. I had another, oh yeah, about the meal, the free and reduced numbers. It might be, I would just caution against thinking that we have that all figured out, because USDA is paying, providing free meals for students through this school year. You know, it might be something, in my mind, is something a little more intimate than that going on. I know that Heartland administrative assistants were and are super helpful in that regard, and, you know, provided kind of confidential and kind help to families. And so without that interface going on, you know, it's an intimidating process. I know that from my own experience, and I know that I've heard folks talk about that. So, you know, so without that personal touch, that might be something that's lacking in keeping those applications from making their way there. So I would be careful about making it too hands off. That new software Craig's talking about that families can submit directly, that sounds a little, I'm not sure that would really get it done. But that's my opinion. Thank you.
And that's just so you know, the Craig software, it's not in my budget. It must be in Craig's budget, I assume.
That's in Craig's.
Just FYI.
Yeah, we supported that upgrade because he felt that online free and reduced application process was pretty slick. He's used it before, and he said it does increase participation. So that's good.
Did you use it in Montpelier, David? Is that where?
Well, I think he used it there, and I think he used it up at Linden Institute. Do you want to stop sharing your screen, Larry? And I think.
Any other questions for me? Everybody good?
Bill has his hand raised.
Well, I'd just like to respond and agree with Scott on some level. I think having an online application, I've held off doing one in Hartford because the person who, well, I won't share why I haven't done it. It has to do with personnel, but you know, I think it would help significantly because it gives a level of privacy that some people would like. But I also agree with Scott in that we have to keep that personal help and that personal touch for other people as an option for the people who want it. I think using the online application as an additional tool, not necessarily a replacement to having people know the process.
Good point. Thank you, Bill.
Good point, Bill.
Rebecca, you still have your hand raised. Did you have another comment?
No.
Okay, thank you. I guess, Ed, if you want to move on.
Want to go to Board of Education now, Ed?
Yeah, sure. So as we scroll down through your spreadsheet, we get into the Board of Education, and that's where all the school board members' costs are associated. The one that sticks out, I think, in that function is $12,000, and what makes that up is the Vermont School Boards Association dues. Were all paid at the SU for all the school board members. In addition, there's a fee that's associated with the processing company that does our HRAs and HSAs. So that fee is paid at the supervisory union and not at schools. So that's part of that. And then finally, there's fingerprinting in there that associated with people that we process at the SU. We do most of the onboarding. We do all of the onboarding at the SU now. So those are the three things that make up that $12,000. Any other questions around what's in the Board of Education? The next section you can see is audit. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Legal services, again, pretty self-explanatory. The next section is the superintendent. Everything in the top, I don't know, 10 lines is related to David and the secretary, Lori Brown. We get down into from line 84 down, or row 84 down. Most of that stuff, again, like for instance, the other professional services. In the past, what's happened with David's budget has been that inevitably, as we go through the school year, there are programs, speakers, and things like that that were unbudgeted that the admin council or admin group wants to do. And because there's no budget in the school districts, David says, put it in mind. So if you look at tuition reimbursement, and please forgive me for this, I don't know why it got coded to tuition reimbursement. That was back in the pre-Lori days. But anyway, what was in there? What's in that $9,729? And that's in cell L78, 972908. About a little over $5,000 of that is Battelle. And Battelle is Portrait of a Graduate too. I think that's synonymous, isn't it?
Yes.
So that money hadn't been budgeted, and it was David had us put it in his budget, and it got budgeted there, and it got budgeted again down about 5 rows down. In the other part, it says other professional services, the $3,575 in cell L84. That's again, Portrait of a Graduate Battelle. So with that in mind, I went through this budget with David the tuition reimbursement line. He's got in his contract for FY22, $2,500 for professional development for himself, which is by code, the state wants us to put it in that tuition reimbursement line. So the other $2,500 is for ancillary services that he's going to, or ancillary coursework that he might take himself or might want someone in the staff to take. So that's why there's $5,000 put into tuition reimbursement. And if you keep going down, one of the lines that we didn't put any money into, and David and I spoke about this, was the line for other professional services. And we didn't do that because $20,000 has been put into Angie's budget to cover the costs that David in the past has had to cover. So we took that out of David's budget. You keep going down, and you've got travel that's in his contract. You've got general supplies for David, and David is the superintendent's office is responsible for not just books and pencils, but also he does. He uses that line for admin group retreats and things like that. And then finally, dues and fees. That's for the Vermont Superintendents Association, the Vermont Special Educators Association, the Vermont, there's all kinds of them. There's like 4 or 5 of them that David might be able to give you some more, a better idea of what those are. But they're all related to the different professional groups that him and other people at the SU are participating in. So overall, his budget is down about $10,000, primarily because we moved that stuff that he had been paying for that was ancillary from his budget into the $20,000 that was added to Angie's budget. Questions on the office of the superintendent?
Rebecca, your hand is raised.
I'm sorry, Amy. No, it's not. I'm still trying to figure this raise hand, lower hand piece out. Yeah. I'll get it soon.
You just click on that hand, it'll go off too.
Does anyone have questions? Okay, you can go on, Ed. Thank you.
Business office.
Okay, so the business office, again, that's my salary, the assistant business manager, 3 other people, Tina, Hayden, and Gail. So the payroll clerk, accounts payable, and human resources. Keep going down. We go through all the wage lines. We get down to the $32,000. That is all the district copiers. So the contract for all the district copiers is now at the supervisory union. And that's based on the fact that year over year, the state is encouraging us strongly to move some of these bigger contracts to the supervisory union. And I can tell you that in the case of the copiers, it resulted in a significant savings overall for the districts and with the cost of copying. So the $32,000 was added. So you look at the 22 actual, the FY20 actual, and you can see that that was $29,000. So we moved it there last year. We moved it there because, again, we were encouraged to by the state, but we didn't budget it there. And by the time we moved it there, we hadn't budgeted it in FY21 either. So when we get done with this year, you're going to see the budget's going to be much lower than the actual because we moved it. But you will realize the savings at your districts because that cost will now be at the supervisory union. Well, we keep going. Go ahead.
So every copier, like one on the 3rd floor at Windsor and one on the 2nd floor at Wethersfield or whatever, those are all part of that 32,000?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
The communications, those are for the SU phones, all on down. I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Questions related to the business office. Operations of buildings, that's the rent and the cost of cleaning the building. Insurance is in there, electricity is in there. Questions on operations of buildings?
So I see that there is the rental land / building going from 39 to 29.
The reason for that is because we have pulled out of the budget the cost of special ed space.
Okay.
So special ed has now got associated costs for rent, cleaning, and electric. Whereas before we were putting it all at the central office.
Which, as Katie will remind us, those are non-reimbursable expenses. So Ed has to track those. We did put them in the special ed budget just because they are special ed uses of that building, but they're non-reimbursable. So we don't get that 56% reimbursement on those types of expenses. They're not very high, but it is what it is. I still don't know why, but that's probably a federal law.
Okay, thanks. Colleen, your hand is up.
That answered my question. There are a couple of lines at the bottom that look like they belonged here, but I suspect they're the special ed lines you were just talking about.
Correct.
The next section is transportation. And what we've done is we've taken the transportation costs for getting students back and forth from school and taken them out of your local budgets and put them at the supervisory union again, because the reimbursements related to that are all coming back to the SU now. So we moved the costs. So for instance, the cost associated with transportation for each one of the schools would have been $238,114. And we took those costs out of your districts and put them at the SU. So that's why when you get down to the very bottom and you take a look at the costs of the central office, there is a difference of $799,000. Well, $714,000 of that is transportation. $32,000 is the copier. And then $20,000 is the additional that we put into Angie's budget.
So without those three things, that it's up how much?
About 1.95%.
Silly question here. I thought transportation was always, at least once it was centralized, that transportation was at the SU level.
No, we never did that.
Well, we bid it at the SU level, Amy, but it was paid and invoiced at the local level. I think part of the issue there was that before the forming of the Mount Scottney School District, you had a disparity, for West Windsor, and then the two really rural districts that like Hartland and Weathersfield. But now with the Mount Scottney merging, and Mount Scottney has all those rural roads and bus routes, the bus company basically says that it's costing all three districts about the same to transport their kids. So and plus I think, and this is probably part of the state's motivation of having things happen at the SU level, I think that, it's going to probably in the end, when we're bidding a larger contract like that now, and it won't say, they'll still have to bid what sections Weathersfield, but I bet we, save a little money. We're in the third year of, I think, a 5 years, so we got a ways to go, but my sense is that'll help.
Great, thank you. Colleen?
Sorry, I need to lower my hand.
So that's the central office, and as I said, just outlined, it's up 46.35%, or $799,931, and that's the basis of one of the assessments, right? Now there are two other assessments that we make for the school districts. The next one is special education, and essentially the special education budget is service plan for FY22, which was submitted by Katie back at the end of September to the state. And basically what that requires her to do is to break out costs by function and object so the state can review them and then come up with, they need the total cost of all of the special ed in the state, so that they can then come up with what they believe they can reimburse. So it's pretty clear, it's been clear to everyone over the years that special ed is not, it's federally mandated, but it's not paid for 100%. So the best we can get for reimbursement, general reimbursement, is between 56 and 56.5%. So we submit, Kate submits a service plan, and that service plan goes to the state along with everyone else's, and then they come up with a total cost of special education, and based on that cost, they have money that they'll get from the feds, and then they can come up with a reimbursement rate. So what you're seeing in the special education budget and what I sent you is just breaking out Kate's service plan into function and object. So from row 141 down through 345 is the special ed service plan for FY22. The only change from that service plan is in row 335, where we have operation of buildings, and we have the cleaning services, the rent, and the electricity estimates for FY22 there. And that's why when you looked at the central office operations of buildings, those were reduced because they were put into that function.
What row is that, Ed?
335. So overall, special ed budget is up $216,699, or 2.88%. Overall, when you add the general fund, because both of these programs make up the general fund, when you add those two together, you come up with $10,275,554, which is an increase of 10.98%, or $1,016,630. And that is the special the central office was up to $799. And the special ed was up $216, $699. Adding those together, you come up with that same $1,016,630. And now, when you look at the cost of special education, which is the $7,749,653, that's the assessed amount. Or that's what I start the assessment with. So when I go in, what I have to do with that number is I have to take that number, I have to take out the total operations of buildings. And then I take that number, I take the result of the 7749 and minus the 34,000 that's part of operations of buildings. And I put that into a a formula that I've created over the years that will give me what we can expect for reimbursement. Okay, so how I come up with that number is some of the costs I get back on a 56 point, well, I use 56.25 because that's the most recent reimbursement rate I have. So I said, all right, some of it's that, and some of it's going to be reimbursed 100%. Costs associated with students that have total expenditures that exceed $60,000 are reimbursed at 100%. So I turned around and I said, all right, I can come up with those numbers when I look at Kate's service plan because it's all spelled out in her service plan. She'll show me the extraordinary kids, because that's who those kids are. They're kids whose total cost is going to exceed 60,000. So then based on that, I can come up with an estimate of what I'm going to get back in reimbursement. Then I take the $7,749,000 that you're looking at right there, and I take out those reimbursements, and then I take that number and I put it into the formula that generates the assessments. So that's the second assessment, and the last assessment is that tab early childhood. David, you're jumping ahead on me.
Sorry, bud.
Yeah. So, which is Fund 2025. Now, early childhood is its own fund because the state wants it that way. So what happens in early childhood is somewhat similar to what happens in the general fund. There's two programs in early childhood. One is their regular education, and the other one is special education. And how special education is funded is there's three funding sources that we use for special education, early childhood special education. The first one is the EEE grant, or the Early Essential Education grant that we get from the state. All right. The second one is IDEIB, which is a federal grant. And the third one is IDEIB preschool, which is another federal grant. So all of the costs for special education are not part of your assessment. They're picked up by those three funding sources. So what I'm showing you here is what is part of your assessment. Okay? So in regular education, you've got one teacher, one assistant. I might lose my power here, so bear with me. And you've got a stipend, and that stipend is administrative. So keep your eye on that 6,500 because it replaced a whole function. Okay? So as we go down through there, we go down and we get down to the bottom of the wages, which is the unemployment or workman's comp, down long-term disability, which is row 24, right? We have other professional services. Okay. Yeah, so we get down there, and the first one is the professional services. That $2,800 is VINs, which is, help me out here, David.
Yeah, VINs, the Vermont Institute of Natural Resources, they do a special preschool program every year. And that's an example of something that I used to put in my budget, which really didn't belong there because it was an early childhood experience, a wonderful experience that lasts almost all year. And the VINS folks come in and work with the 3- and 4-year-olds. And so Jennifer did not want to lose it. I felt like I just couldn't keep taking it out of my budget when I didn't really budget for it. So that's why it's there now.
All right. So you keep going down and you get to $471,513. Now, what is that? That's I can't remember the act now. I want to say Act 166.
That's correct.
Which that's back in 2016, the state put together a program, and they said that each school district was going to be responsible for paying, in 2016, it was $3,000 for each student, each preschooler that went to a approved program. And over the years, it's gone up. So what we just got announced is that the cost for the tuition now is $3,536. So how we did it is we took a look at the FY20 actuals, which you want to go over there, David, and highlight the 11,314. Yeah. So, and the 436, 150. No, yeah, right below the 11,000. Yeah. So I added those two numbers together, and then I divided by the FY20 tuition, and what I came up with was 133.33 students. Okay. I took that 133, and I had a meeting with Jennifer Sprague, and I didn't tell her that that was what I was doing, and she basically gave me 133 kids. So her estimate and the math works. So what I did was I took the 133.33 and I multiplied it by the cost that the state gave me of $3,536, which gave me the $471,513. All right. Now, why did it go up so much? Well, what we've noticed here and what we've noticed at the schools is there's been an increase in tuition students overall, whether it's high school or pre-K. There have been a lot of people that have moved in. And I attribute the increase to that. We're starting to see more people coming up here that weren't here when we developed the budgets that preceded this year's FY22's budget.
Plus, I think the other thing that's happening is the preschool. If you remember back in 2016, when we started this, or when the state started this preschool program, we serviced under 100 kids. It was probably about 90 kids. We're now up to 133. So the good news is we're educating more and more of our 3- and 4-year-olds and getting them ready for kindergarten through these private providers, which you could argue, whether or not we have control over quality or not. But I think they work hard to provide a good program. I mean, that's the bad news is, by state law, we're paying for it. And that tuition, I said to Ed, it looks like over the last 5 years, that tuition cost, and quite frankly, having been married to a preschool teacher and an owner of a childcare, it's still not enough, but it's gone up about 20%. And that $3,500 per student is a significant increase over what it was back in 2016. But we're also getting those kids 10 hours of certified licensed instruction over the course of a year per week. So they're guaranteed 10 hours a week for that amount of money.
So if you go down to the bottom, you'll see that when you add it all together, the cost of special education, regular ed early childhood is up 32.69%, or $147,000, and almost all of it can be attributed to the tuition. Now, as I said before, I wanted you to keep in mind that $6,500 stipend. There's a section there that's all zeros now, and that used to be the administrative portion of early childhood regular ed. And David has whittled that back down to $6,500 stipend, which is a significant savings. So the $596,912 is what would go into the assessment portion. So David, if you want to go all the way down. Yeah, there you go. There's the 596. That's where it's 147,000 more. 32.69. When you go back, David, can you go to the assessment tab? All right, so I always struggle with this section because it's kind of confusing. I want to show you the differences between the year we're in and the year we're budgeting for, which in this case is FY21 is the year we're in, and FY22 is the year we're budgeting for. I'm going to take the early childhood section because it's the top one anyway. And at the very top, last year we budgeted $449,850. And how we then parse that out to the districts as an assessment is we took the equalized pupil from FY20. Okay? So we used equalized pupil from FY20 to come up with percentages. And you look at the far right-hand side, you can see how I generated the expenditures. I took the equalized pupil numbers, I added them all together, and then I divided each town into the total and came up with a percentage. Now, I want you to notice that I used in FY21, I used the FY20 equalized pupil. Why didn't I use FY21? Well, because when I put the budget together, which is right now, I didn't have FY21. I didn't get that till almost the end of December. And historically, the school boards have wanted to approve the SU budget because the assessments are a significant part of their budget before I actually get the equalized pupil numbers. So each one of those numbers, as you go down from the 449,850, you can see 1.6 million, 2.887. All of those numbers in FY21, I then assessed out to the districts based on that same formula of equalized pupil. Okay? So now FY22, I used FY21 equalized pupils because I got that number. That's how I did it here. So we just got through with early childhood, and that 596,912 is what I'm assessing. All right? So when I use that percentage, 596,912, and I multiply it by the percent of equalized pupils in FY21, the assessment for early childhood for Heartland is $191,164, or $44,338 more than it was in the year we're in. Okay? I also want you to notice, you look at the percentages. In FY21, Heartland's percentage of equalized pupils was 32.64%. And FY22, it's 32.03%. So there's an increase in the cost of early childhood, but there's a decrease in the percentage of that cost that Heartland's having to pay. And that's important because it helps to explain Mount Scottney, for instance. If you take a look at Mount Scottney's percentage of equalized pupil in 21 was 43.72. Now it's 45.27. Of the three districts, it's the only one that went up in FY22 as a percentage. The other ones went down. Heartland's went down. Wethersfield's went from 23.64 in 21 to 22.7. So then if you get out of the central assessment, again, you could look at the column that says FY21. That's what we assessed in FY21. But more importantly, if we go over to the $2.257 million, that's what we assessed. And what we assessed is based on the total cost of our central office, less the reimbursement that we can expect for transportation and other associated costs. And some of those others, for instance, at the for that are, we have other program income. Other program income is income that Larry's group generates by doing work for the town of Windsor. So the two things that I subtracted from the total cost of the central office assessment before I did the assessment to the towns was $15,000 for other program income, for what Windsor pays us for the services that Larry's group provides them, and then an estimated $253,000 of what the state will give us back as a reimbursement for our total transportation costs. And how the state generates that number is they come up with a cost associated with transportation for all the school districts in the state using a statistics report that I provide them in the summer. And then they use that to come up with a per mile, a rate per mile that they'll reimburse. And they multiply that by that rate by our mileage, which I provide them in that stat report. So that's why when you look at the central office assessment number of $2,257,178, it's not going to equate exactly to what the expenditure report says. It's going to be less because I took those two numbers out. But you can see the same formula in the central office assessment works as it did in the early childhood. It's the same percentages that I used of equalized pupil. And you can see, for instance, Mount Scottney's, the increase in 2% for Mount Scottney equated to a $319,711 increase. So overall, by moving transportation in, we just showed you how much the $799,000 was. And why I say that is because when we were on the expenditure side, when we looked at the end result of the central office had increased $799,000. And then we went through and we talked about the $20,000 we added to Angie's budget, the $32,000 we added to copiers, and the $714,000 we put into transportation, and we came up with $766,000. Well, if you look here, that increase isn't $766,000; it's $651,000. But again, it's because of the monies that we took out. And then we get to special education, and that's even more complicated in the sense that the total cost of special education, if you were to look at the expenditure tab, is $7,749,653. Yet, I'm only assessing, and I say only because it's the only word I can think of. I'm only assessing $3,163,870. Why is that? Well, it's because I have that formula that I've generated what I think the state's going to reimburse. So I'm only assessing what the state's not giving us, or essentially, let's use 56%. So that's 44% of the special ed budget. It's not truly 44% because some of the special ed reimbursement is going to be based on the extraordinary students. Some of it will be state placed students. So each one of those categories provides a higher reimbursement rate than the standard 56.5% or 56.25%.
Now, one of the
things. Okay,
go
ahead.
Oh, I didn't know, Ed, maybe you're going to go there right now, but the fact that as we serve more and more of those extraordinary kids at home, the reimbursement rates go down. Were you going to go to that, get there at some point?
Well, I mean, I think that over the years, the people that have been on the school board, on the SU board for a while, I've heard that the tuitions for kids that are served out of district are very high. And the word extraordinary is very apropos. It is extraordinary. There's a lot of costs associated with out of district placement. So that cost has been something that has been addressed and been talked about for years. And one of the ways to solve that has been to bring services back into the SU so the kids don't have to go out of districts. And it serves two purposes. In one sense, you're not paying tuition. In another sense, it's better to educate the kids. At least this is what I've heard from the people in the education side. to try to bring the kids back into the district and provide the services they need in the district. Well, one of the things you forgo when you do that is you're not getting that higher reimbursement rate for costs over 60. So you're transferring the cost you would pay to tuition to building the infrastructure that it takes to have these kids come back. So at least initially, there's going to be a cost associated with building that infrastructure that may outstrip the benefit or the cost of the tuition. But the hope is over time that will reverse itself. The infrastructure will be built at the SU, at the schools in the SU, to service kids that have extraordinary needs. And thereby, the cost should start to level off. I can't ever say with special ed that the cost will go down, because they just don't go down. But I do know that Kate has looked into the cost associated with these kids and tried to look at regional solutions. Like, for instance, Hartford has a lot of programs that we take advantage of. Springfield has some programs. And participating in those groups can have the benefit of being lower than doing a private program per se. But each student gets addressed individually through their IEP. But that's why when you look at this, that's why it doesn't, like, for instance, although...
Can I chime in for a second, Ed? It's Katie.
Go ahead, Katie.
I just want to say one more thing.
Go ahead.
When I showed you special ed budget, I said that the budget overall from FY21 to FY22 went up $216,699. But when you look at this assessment spreadsheet, it says it's gone up by $276,706. Well, that's because the reimbursement ratio changed. Okay? So the reimbursements that the new mix generates is going to be less because there aren't as many extraordinary kids as there were in the past. Go ahead, Katie.
I just wanted to, and I know Bill had his hand up, but what you had just said about some of our collaboratives, we actually, 2 of Hartford's collaboratives are more expensive than several of our other placements. We but we are looking at other collaborative options regionally, including Hartford. I mean, that has been one that we are regionally part of. We are also part of a collaborative with Springfield, the occupational development program. So, but that was, I just wanted to clarify that piece, and then I'll turn it over to Bill if that's okay, because he had his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo the fact that bringing services in district is not always the silver bullet. As someone who's run an actual in-district program in Claremont, as Ed has pointed out before, and I'm sure Katie realizes that if you build an in-district program, you have to staff it. And so that turnaround of staff to cost, especially when you get to that programs don't fit all students, and you'll never get away if you tried to design a program for every student, individual needs. It would be a money-losing situation.
Yeah, and I think that emphasizes also, too, there's that issue that Bill just mentioned, and then I think Ed's point is a good point, that from a financial standpoint, the reimbursements, that's what I wanted to point out mostly, is that the special ed budget's up, 2-point-something%, but the assessments are up quite a bit more than that because of the reimbursement factor, less kids in out-of-district placements, less reimbursement. So there's a trade-off. But I'll tell you, when you're at that IEP table with a parent who's trying to make a decision about where they want their child to go, they much more would rather see the student in their home district than they would in some placement, be it in Hartford or Brattleboro or someplace else, it's a very difficult trade-off. But I think, especially this year, Katie's done a good job, keeping kids home, even though sometimes it takes those 1 or 2 BIs with that child to be able to keep them in their home school or close to their home environment. But, the truth is then, certainly not in a COVID environment, but if there's a birthday party, there are kids they can invite to their birthday party who live in the neighborhood. And I'm not trying to get too dramatic about this, but this budget serves the most vulnerable among us. And I really think Katie's done a great job. I think Karen before her tried to hold costs, but it's hard to apologize for this budget because it is what it is, and it serves an incredibly needy population.
Katie, your hand is raised again.
Just a quick thing is, we also have a little lull in a population of students who are aging out. So part of what Ed's referring to, because you don't see the list of students that Ed sees for this extraordinary reimbursement, we're experiencing 4 students at least that will not be at one of the high-cost placements. So that alone, plus some changes, and Bill, I completely agree. We can't build everything, but we can look at a lot. But there's always, we're committed to, and that's in special ed, the range of service options and that continuum. But combined with kids who are staying and some aging out as we're looking for next year, we have a lull. It doesn't mean that in a couple more years with the crystal ball that we might go up again. We never know. We also had a lot of kids move in. A lot of kids move in this year. And almost every new student, Christine is on, and I think Colleen too, can attest to almost every one of them came with an IEP. We have converted a lot of out-of-state IEPs this year. So we are not seeing a dip in numbers. It's not because we're identifying more kids. They moved here with their IEPs. So if that helps a little bit shape it.
So that's the way we generate the assessments, and those are the assessments. You get down to the very bottom, and I'm just taking a look at the total district assessments, and I'm comparing the totals from FY21, and that total includes the early childhood, central office, and then special ed. It adds those all together, and it makes a comparison from 21 to 22 for each district, and you can see the differences. And then the other columns just to check to make sure I did it right. So essentially, everything's up by $1,074,000. Where did it go?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, $1,074,974. And I explained the reasons why they were all up. So, having said that, are there questions associated with the assessments or anything else that we've talked about tonight?
I have one, just kind of an overall. When we go back to our individual district budgets, will we see the trade-off, like a zero of particular lines because they're now part of our SU assessment?
Yes.
So hopefully our individual budgets won't see this significant increase.
Well, I'm only taking out your transportation costs and your copier costs.
Okay.
Those are the 2 things I'm taking out of your budget. This budget reflects a 10% increase in health insurance and an increase for wages. So I can't guarantee you that and Heartland and Wethersfield also includes tuition for their 9 through 12 students. So I can't say that it's going to show zeros in your budget. Yes. Will it make your budgets go negative? I mean, as year-over-year comparisons, I'd have to say no.
But to your point, Amy, and I'm not trying to just put a positive spin on this, I think your point's a good one. If you look at Weathersfield, the difference is 197,742. And essentially, we're going to take 200 and, let's say, round it off after reimbursements, about 200,000 out of, for transportation. We're going to take it out, right? So basically, in Weathersfield, it's a zero difference, right? I mean, and in Heartland, it's going to be negligible. Mount Scottney, not so negligible because, the equalized pupil rate percentages went up as well as the cost. So I think there's a way to demonstrate, those differences based on those few categories that we're taking out of the local budgets. But I agree with Ed. It's not going to necessarily give you a zero bottom line. It might help the bottom line a little bit, but it's not going to give you a zero bottom line.
Right. And is an increase in equalized pupil, does that also equate to a slight increase in revenues for the individual districts?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Ed, I think what she's talking about is on your tax computation sheet, the equalized pupil that you receive at the end of December, if that is a little higher in Mount Scottney, that should generate a little bit larger block grant, right?
No, what it'll generate is a lower tax rate.
Well, that's, yeah.
That works too.
Because you'll be dividing, but yeah. It's the same thing, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions that people have?
Yeah, because Amy, I don't know if there are questions, but what Ed and I would like tonight, I think, just because we've got to get that number that we fix, and again, when it gets the equalized pupil, I mean, we would like a tentative approval of this budget tonight. I think that's important.
Do people have comments on tentative approval of this budget, given that we only saw it since 11:30 this afternoon or this morning? Colleen, your hand is raised.
What's a tentative approval?
Well, I mean, like Ed said, he's going to get the real live equalized pupil numbers the end of December, and there may be.
I think the most important part, Colleen, is not the equalized pupil numbers, but one of the numbers that I will get is I'm basing the reimbursements on a formula that I generated. We will get, based on Katie's service plan, the state's estimate of what those reimbursements are going to be. So I don't know when I'll get them, but I can tell you that I filed a report on July 15th for the final special education expenditure report, which generates the final reimbursements I get for the last year for special education costs. And I still haven't gotten any money for that reimbursement.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do in a perfect world is I'd like to have their numbers rather than my estimates.
Yeah. So
that's one of the big numbers, because the reimbursements that they come up with could be more than what I'm going to do, which would lower the special education amount of the assessment.
So the numbers are tentative, but what does it mean for us to approve it?
Well, I guess, Colleen, I misspoke. What'll be tentative is the assessments, right? I don't want you to think you're approving I mean, the page you're looking at right now, that's the number right there, the 10,275,554. Those are the expenditures. Those include the transportation transfer, the copier transfer, the 20,000 to support the strategic plan, and there aren't any other big initiatives in there. The 10% health insurance.
But revenue will change.
But the revenues may change, which will affect the assessment. So the motion we'd be looking for tonight is to approve the 10,275,554 with the understanding that those assessments will still flex a bit.
Right. So we're approving that bottom line, but we will not know until a few weeks from now how that amount is going to affect our local budgets.
Yep.
And in my email today to everybody, I think everybody got it. But essentially, if you take that 10,275,000 and you subtract out the transportation, you subtract out the copiers, you subtract out the 20,000 for support of the strategic plan, you're a little over. You're about a 2.4% increase overall.
Okay, Elizabeth, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Amy. I'm not comfortable passing tonight because I have not had a single moment to look carefully through this budget, and it's big. And so I apologize, but I can't do it. Sorry.
No, and that's fine. I just, my point is I don't think we can wait till the end of December, unless, Ed, you think differently. I mean, if we're going to start finalizing local budgets and getting town reports written in the end of December into early January, we're going to need that assessment number. But I suppose we can hold this and just have another meeting, at.
Y'all can have the vote without me. I'll just vote no, because I don't think that a few hours to look through an annual budget is enough time.
Right. So I have a question. Could the board members in this meeting who feel similar to Elizabeth, could you please raise your hand? So we have kind of a show. So we have 4 people. And I'm 5. I think I would prefer.
Yeah, I've always, and I know it's impossible, I get your point, Elizabeth. I'm not trying to push this or rush this. We're just going to have to set up a timeline to get this done after people have looked through it. This is the second time. There are no major changes from the first presentation a month ago, but I understand it's a lot of money. But I also think that's another reason why it's very tough to have a split vote. You don't want your supervisory union budget supported by only half or 2/3 of your SU board. It doesn't speak well going into town meetings and presenting the SU budget. So I'm saying if we don't do it tonight, we've just got to set a time in the next couple of weeks when we can do it, and people have had a time to generate questions and go forward. Not much is going to change on the expenditure side unless you tell us to cut 3 people, then we can start saving lots of money. But I mean, I don't know. So I guess that's where I'm at this point.
I think I know there are other people with hands raised, but I don't know if they just haven't lowered them yet. I feel like people need to and deserve to be able to review this longer. But I don't understand why we can't just move forward with this into the local budgets, even if it's not approved. It's not, with review, it's not going to change dramatically. And I think that people should take the time to review it and really get it and know the nuts and bolts. But I don't feel particularly pressured to vote today or next week if we just agree to let this, as it is, get stuck into the budgets that the local districts are putting together. And then, at our next meeting or whenever we decide, vote on it and finalize it. But, we've already, I guess I am moving forward to say tentatively, but it's a very tentative, like it's not approved yet, but let's just use what we have right now as a placeholder because it's the best thing we have.
That's exactly what we'd have to do, Nikki. That's a good point. Those assessments are going to swing anyway. It's just that if anybody in the back of their mind was thinking that, we need to cut 300,000 out of this, then we've got a lot of work to do. And I don't want to get surprised the end of December, with that sort of I think we can move forward with these assessment numbers with the understanding that people, certainly deserve and have a right. And Ed and I talked about this today. We wanted to get this out on Friday, but there were just some things that were coming in that, that needed to get put into this budget. And then we needed to spend a little time this morning, he and I, going over it. So I completely understand. And we will use these tentative assessment numbers in your local budgets. It's just that eventually those local budgets need to go to print, usually around the beginning of January. So by the end of December, we're trying to get those final, and I'm mostly thinking about, and I'm not trying to, have everybody feel bad for Ed, but Ed is managing 4 budgets right now, and he's trying to get these spreadsheets articulated to a point where they are ready for a printer and ready for, and that's not a reason to approve this tonight, but it is a reason to approve it before January 4th. And then it would be physically impossible to get these spreadsheets ready for a town report.
Bill, your hand is raised.
Yes, it was. I have a brainstorm, Amy. If you create a survey with a single question that says, I've had time to look at this. And we all have reviewed it long enough, then we might be able to make a quick meeting to approve it. Once everyone has had time to review it to their satisfaction, so that then we can just have a 15-minute meeting and approve it, or we could put together questions in the same survey and then have those questions answered. Just an idea.
The next SU board meeting scheduled is December 28th. And my point is that is just too late. That
Right. It would have to be a special meeting.
Correct.
And if we were all to review this budget, like Bill said, and state that we have reviewed it, then we could all vote on it, and it would only take approximately 15 minutes, because I don't see where, given the goals that we have for providing the best educational opportunities for all of our students, and what those opportunities are being done at the SU level, I don't see where we could responsibly try to cut out 300,000, say, and at the same time say that we're doing our best to provide the best educational opportunities for all of our students. So I think it's just a matter of knowing, having a better idea of what all of these numbers are, and then coming back, say, in a week to vote yes or no.
Actually, the week next week we're pretty heavy on board meetings with Wethersfield and Heartland. I mean, we could squeeze another one in. I noticed the week of the 14th, there's virtually no board meetings that week. So we could take that Monday night, the 14th. I think the other place where Ed Connors has been very generous is that if anybody wants to go through more detail with him, or wants to reach out with him and go through that detailed budget and ask questions, Ed is, perfectly willing, I know, to do that with folks, and he's done that in the past. So I think that's a great idea that Bill had. We just kind of, take our time with this budget. It's a lot of money, and you ought to understand it, and you ought to understand where it went up and where it went down, and how the reimbursements work and how the assessments work, especially for a couple of new board members that are on the SU board. I understand the complexity here. But what I'm saying is much past December 14th, and I think we're going to be in a little bit of trouble in terms of getting everything ready for print.
So all of our boards will meet by the 14th, correct?
Let me go in and look at that. I think that's
No, Heartland won't meet till after.
not the case, right? Heartland doesn't meet till that following Monday.
Heartland's the 21st.
Ah, okay.
And quite frankly, Heartland by the 21st, certainly within the next, they may need one special meeting after the 21st, but they're going to want to be getting pretty close to finalizing their budgets. Ed should start to get the tax information in, for local budgets. That impacts local budgets, not the SU budget, by mid-December to end of December. So that's why I like to give Ed time to do the work with those local budgets that he needs to do in terms of those tax worksheets, the equalized pupil updates, all of that stuff, which is why I don't want to go I don't want to go too deep into December on manipulating the SU budget if we don't have to. Understanding that it's great I think you deserve time with this budget. And I apologize we couldn't get it out on Friday. I'm not sure that would have made a difference with the holiday, but it is what it is. Does the 14th seem like a time we could meet?
I personally would be willing to meet before that if everyone has read it and is okay. I'm fine with having a 15-minute meeting. If everybody's on the same page, I'm good with that.
Well, there's also no meeting Monday the 7th. Tuesday is Wethersfield. Wednesday is Mount Escutney. I just like to think about, like Scott said, your little $500 stipend. You deserve better than to have to go to 2 meetings in one. But if we can do it relatively quickly on that Monday, then I think we could pull that off.
I think we probably can do it quickly on that Monday if everyone takes the time between now and then to look over these numbers and ask for any sort of clarifications from Ed.
Or Katie, if it's special ed.
Right.
Email works really well. They can certainly answer any question you might have.
And let me see. Let me go. Sorry. Bill, are you still your top with a hand raised, and then there's Colleen and then Mark?
I think Bill's done.
Okay. Colleen, and then you, Mark.
I actually wanted just to check. I'm fine voting whenever, but I want people to have the time that they need to do. But I think because I was on the budget committee, I've had a chance to look at the numbers a little bit more. And I'm not going anywhere, so whenever. If it's going to be a 15-minute meeting.
Yeah.
But are we trying to tie in? I know we were looking at trying to get the plan, and I'm sorry I missed the meeting last week, but trying to get the portrait of a graduate plan explained to inform the budget. And are we trying to do anything in relation to the anti-racism task force to inform the budget? And have we done those things?
Well, at the meeting, Colleen, that, when you weren't there, we did talk about that. And we felt that the early stages of that strategic plan were going to take take some time with staff members to develop those learning frameworks and the work that Angie's got to do. So we talked about trying to budget some money for some work over the summer when you can get concentrated work done when school's not in session. So that's part of what that 20,000 is that we put in tonight. The board said, let's put that in. But right now that's it. I mean, I think going forward, whether it's local budgets or the SU budget, we're going to need to continue to support that plan. But that was the sort of the base minimum that we did. That's a 20,000 Ed referred to.
Okay. Just checking.
Yep.
And we're taking our time on the anti-racism task force so that we get it right. So we just aren't ready for anything right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Good questions. Thank you, Colleen. Mark.
I would feel comfortable voting next week as well. I think that gives us enough time because we know some of this is still in flux as far as reimbursements go. But I think that's going to give us enough time. So I'd be happy to vote next week. And I'm going to presume I can just go ahead and share this with all the members of the Wethersfield board. So that way, if they have any other questions for me and are not actually present at this meeting, that they can get up with me. Correct?
Was that a question mark?
I'm sorry. That was a question. Yeah. I mean, can I just forward this to the other Wethersfield board members?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. I mean, and hopefully they can get to looking at it this week. And if they have any other concerns that I need to address next week for a vote, then I'd be certainly willing to do it or get together with Ed about.
Yeah, I'm here and I'm okay with, I agree, Mark, I'm okay with voting next week too. So it's Kristen.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Scott and then Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I clicked that hand by mistake, but I did have a question that was, I'm not sure how that happened, but I think it's, sometimes it's, I'll just say I can vote next week as well. I guess I'm a little uneasy tonight with the process, and I don't know how the process gets changed unless, we put our foot down, David, and say that we can't do this on this time schedule. And I don't want to really make big riffs here. I just think that as being a school director, how do you get these changes? I mean, I remain like I'm still puzzled that this happens pretty frequently. I mean, annually, that it's hard to get people around the SU budget, and it's hard to get it done. And there's always Thanksgiving, right? That's not a surprise. So, I mean, I guess in general, what I'm saying is that it's not really people quickly, the example that was just thrown around for the last few minutes was a $300,000 cut, but I think it's equally as valid to say, are we spending enough? That's what I'm trying to say. Like, why is there not enough person power to have this kind of a thing done sooner? And I think that's a valid question. And to get to the strategic plan, the last SU meeting, there was a lot of discussion about some of the key parts in the strategic plan. One of them was a need for better communication, or more consistent, perhaps is the right word, across all districts. So specifically, how does that show up in the budget? Or I think Colleen's word was the best, inform the budget. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, it's certainly not in there, Scott. I mean, it's not something we'd be opposed to put in there. I mean, that's I think we did talk about that a little bit last week around a communication slash, I forget what it was. There was another part of that data. There was the data person too. There were a couple of places in there. I think it's just been the administrative team's feeling, and certainly the central office administrative team's feeling, that much like at the local levels, given the uncertainty of where we are and the unpredictability of FY 22 next year, that this didn't seem like the year to be putting positions in the SU budget. But to your other point, I think you're right. I mean, it's part of the supervisory union model, right? Which I don't know, who was drinking on what night, who decided this was a good way to organize schools, but it's not, it's the first time I've worked in a supervisory union, and we run into this every year. It's one of the reasons why some supervisory unions have voted to put the local votes off till April or May. They have a later time, so they have more time to digest the centralized pieces of this before they have to go to their voters. But we haven't changed that timeline. I'm not suggesting we do change that timeline, but if we don't, we're always going to be in that crunch. September, October, November, local budgets December, out to the towns in January, because you've got to have that for no more than 30 days, no less than 45 days notice before town meeting. So and in there, you've got Thanksgiving, you've got Christmas, you've got Hanukkah, you've got Kwanzaa, it's just the way it is. And I wish it wasn't that way, but it's the way SUs are set up. Hartford will be looking at their budget, Hartford School District, and they'll be making changes right up till January as a single district. We don't have that luxury, so
that's a good example. I appreciate that explanation, and I think that just in general, that I would one thing that makes me uneasy about stipends for administrators or teachers over the summer to work on communications
or curriculum,
or for that matter, even board members stepping up and doing significant pieces with research or something like that. It's just not, doesn't look like a sustainable model to me. And that's why, I think the best example of a system that was built at home and has gone in the right direction is the food program, or the food project, excuse me, in the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Mark, did you still want your hand raised? Okay, thank you. Rebecca?
Yes, I have a couple of comments. First, I want to just, I do want to comment on what Scott mentioned, and the piece on if we are going to move forward with plans, and I brought this up at our last meeting, David, that whole piece of professional development. And do we sort of just wait and set aside time in the summer for staff to participate in that piece? I feel that you don't have to use all of the professional development money that staff have. And I understand, as you mentioned last time, we have younger professionals moving into the teaching profession, and their focus is to access professional development that's going to increase their skills in teaching. And I think that that's also really important. But I'm just wondering if there is a way to get some of that in during the year, and not have to wait till one particular time and to engage in that discussion. After many years of participating in professional development, I would attend some really exciting professional development one time in the year. And when you come back, sometimes it was really hard to integrate that because it was really not part of the ongoing conversation that were going on in the school. So I think you would try and make it sustainable when you integrate it throughout the year, not if you only have it once a year. That it's just, this is a tough year. So I don't really, I can't speak to what you can do this year, but that's my thought on integrating the strategic plan. The other point, Colleen brought up a good point, and she said she missed the last meeting, and I was at the last meeting, and when I don't recall when we were really looking at we talked about integrating portrait and talked about integrating the diversity goal, but what I'm finding and feeling now is that we're going to be implementing a budget, or at least agreeing to one, and at some point speaking to the public about this particular budget. And I'm just thinking, so where in this process do we talk to the people, the community about the portrait? Where do we talk about the diversity or anti-racism piece that we have been saying to the community? We're bringing that forward. Is that I just don't see that falling into place. And one of the things that we wanted to do is be as transparent, as Amy mentioned, with the community as possible. We wanted to really make this, let them see this is all connected. And I'm just wondering if we're going to be able to really do that. If we're, and do you know what I'm saying? It's just, I'm just a little bit stuck on when is this all going to happen, because right now the focus is to get the budget through, and I really want to thank Ed for doing an awesome job in helping me understand this budget. So I'm walking away understanding it definitely better than I, as just looking through it. So I appreciate that. But there are some things that need to be a little bit more specific, and I'm not seeing that. So when Colleen's question was, did I miss that? Where is that going to happen? And when is that going to happen in terms of the discussion to the community?
Oh, in terms of discussion with the community, that's going to happen more at the local district meetings when we have our local town meeting, that will be discussing our local budgets and how this assessment is part of that budget. And again, the professional development was a big part of that conversation of what we want to do in terms of the strategic plan and how that ties to portrait of a graduate. And so, yeah, so that's where that is tied in, is also with our local budget and bringing that forward at our town meetings. Bill, your hand is raised.
Yeah, before Bill goes, I just wanted to that point, Amy, I think what would be good at our local town meetings, and I think this speaks to what you're saying, Rebecca, is if we could have 2 or 3 unified slides that sort of outline our efforts in anti-racism and outline our efforts in the strategic plan. I think then we bring a unified message to our 3 towns around these efforts. Whether that'll be reflected big time in our budgets or not, I always felt that was a little compressed, but at least we can let them know this is our guidepost for the next X number of years, and this is what's critical about that. So it's a good point, Rebecca.
Yeah, just before anyone else goes, I'm looking at the time, it's 8:41, and we still have a couple more items of importance on our agenda. So in terms of talking about the budget, there are 2 more people with hands raised. I think, Angie, you had yours raised for a moment. So
I'm all set, Amy.
I
Thank
first
you.
saw Bill.
Okay,
Bill, do you want to go?
I think, Angie, you have something to say? No. Yes?
Sorry, I think my internet is floofy.
I think there's power stuff going on, I think.
Yeah,
power outages and all that kind of stuff going.
I'll be real quick. Basically, I just want to summarize, what I remember from the last meeting, some of Scott's questions, some of, Scott's concerns and Rebecca's question. As far as the communication piece and the data piece, I think what I perceive was with last week's meeting was before we move forward with either one of those pieces, we have to analyze who within the district does those pieces already, thus figuring out what we actually need before we add, an $80,000 price tag to each new person, which is an average with average salary with benefits. As for the summer staff development, when we were discussing that, the need to do much of the work that's laid out in the strategic plan, there is a lot of work to be done with creating goals, creating timelines, creating different assessments, and all that stuff that's in there. And Angie could speak to that more later on at another time. But that summer work really was having staff, teachers work on that with administration. And that happens twofold. One, it gets the work done. Second, it creates buy-in and understanding by teaching staff who are working on it. So that's what the intent was when I brought up the fact of creating a time during the summer, and to be able to have part of that $20,000 that Ed put in, or all of it, to pay for that work that need to be done. And what happens is you don't hire someone outside the district to come in and do the work. You have the educational professionals in your district get paid to do that work, and then they become experts in that work, and it creates a cycle of success. So that's all I wanted to talk on.
Great, thank you. Let me see. Rebecca, is your hand still? No? Okay. Ed?
Just say that I see no urgency in any. I mean, I can go forward, as Nikki pointed out, with the assessments that I just showed you tonight. I mean, if you want to change them later on, I can change them. And if you have any questions between now and December, whatever, I'm there to answer them. What I've found over the years, Scott, is that there aren't a lot of questions. So I did meet with a budget committee not too long ago. I don't know, David, what was it, a month ago?
Probably 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. And who participated? It was Colleen and Mark and
Colleen, Mark, and who else was there with us?
Bill was there.
Bill Yates.
Yeah. So we did have a conversation then, and the budget has been available. I mean, anytime that anybody's got a question regarding the budget, you can either join the budget committee or contact me directly. I'd be happy to share it with you. What I'm trying to do is project. I sometimes get confused with the board because I'm not sure whether you want to have a budget that is less money or a budget that has everything you want. And I can do the less money piece, but I don't know about the pieces that you want to add into the budget. Those are the parts that I need to get from the board. So if that's the issue, then I welcome that. If you want to put more in, you just let me know and I'll develop a new budget. But again, I'm available. If you want to if you have any questions or anything else, Rebecca's been in touch with me. Other people have called, so please send your questions and I'll be happy to answer them.
And what we want, of course, is, well, not of course. What we want is a budget that is as realistic as you can get in terms of the special ed, that we don't always have the concrete figures. You know, it's always kind of fluctuating, but to have it as close as we can to a realistic number. We don't want you to say, okay, we'll only spend this much and then have, you know, to be completely over budget this time next year, which is what happened a few times 14 years ago when I first got on the board. If you remember any of that, Ed.
Yeah, I think that was the budget that I inherited.
Yeah, the first one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the one thing I do feel confident tonight is that, you know, these numbers are accurate. I think especially with special education, we have a service plan that matches the actual expenditures. That's, you know, that's going to be really helpful. So I think there's a sense of accuracy, but I don't think anybody should feel guilty that they need a little more time to digest this and to ask questions that need to be asked. And then I just hate throwing other meetings. I get paid to go to these meetings, but I feel bad for everybody else who might have to attend another meeting. But if you're all willing to do that, then I'd say let's look at something. It sounded like the 7th could work. It sounded like the 14th could work. And I don't think it has to be a long meeting if you've gotten to Ed ahead of time this week. So do you want to set a time, a night, Amy? Does the 7th work? Is there anybody that the 7th would not work for? Raise your hand.
Is there anybody that would be really upset if we delayed until 7 on the 7th?
Well, we could do that, especially if it was going to be quick. Elizabeth looks like she's got a commitment on the 7th.
I am booked straight through that week from today. Yeah, I'm booked solid that whole week, unfortunately. But you can have the meeting without me. You don't need me to. So.
Yeah. Well, I just think as many people that can vote on this budget, the better. We don't have to have everybody at the meeting. You're absolutely right. I think Ed has his hand up again.
Yeah, Ed?
Maybe Ed has left the house.
That's an error.
Okay, we got it.
Okay.
Ed has nothing to say. So the other Monday we looked at was the 14th. I'm okay with that as well. Are you booked?
14th works for me.
Anybody that cannot make the 14th?
Let's do it.
All right, it's a go.
If it's going to be a quick meeting, I have a kid in Woodstock at 6:30, so I'm just trying to make that work.
She has to be. The kid has to be there at 6:30, or
no, she has to come home. So I can meet you in the car at 6, or I can meet you from my office at 7. But
I don't mind it being a little later since it's only going to be a 15-minute.
We could go 7
I'm holding you to the 15 minutes, though.
Yes, I'm holding everyone to the 15 minutes as well. So
and David, no surprise exec.
No surprise executive.
No.
No, we're good. So do you want to go with the 14th at 7 p.m.? And we'll keep it as brief as we can. Is that okay?
Okay.
I will send out the invite. You might even have it before the next agenda item.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. We are moving on. Anti-racism task force. Is there an update?
Not much of one, but a little bit of one. There was a group, let's see, the group of administrators met with Ariel and James. And I think that was, I don't know, we've been having so many meetings. I don't know if anything's happened since our last one. But the group of administrators met with Ariel and James, and now there's a group of teachers who will be meeting with them tomorrow. And I believe there are also a couple of community members that are very tied to the school. Is that correct, David?
Yeah, and a matter of fact, I think a couple of those community members were able to make it tomorrow night. So, and these are people who had actually signed up for the original. So I talked with Jameson and Ariel, and they said it would be fine to combine those two groups to answer those questions. So that's tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, and everybody seems to be really looking forward to that time.
So that'll be another question and listening tour from Ariel and Jameson, just to get an idea of what the issues are in our community. And I think from there I'll reach out to them again, but I think at that point they'll have what they need to create a draft set of policies that we can bring to the SU board task force. So that draft set of policies would be reviewed internally first, and then we would be able to share that with the
larger group.
The community members that we each selected for each town. So that's the update. So I don't have anything concrete yet, but things are moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, Nikki, I think part of the confusion initially, but now I think it's been cleared up because they have met with these subgroups to do the listening tour, and I think that was critical. But I think folks thought that, you know, there would be this one task force that did all of this together, and so that's been explained to everybody now, and I think they understand that. And I think what we've got to start doing is referring to the internal task force and the external task force to some degree, or at some point we have to bring those two together so that we have a sense of group think as we move through this. But
can you explain it some to us?
So the internal task force is only SU board members. Yeah. And the idea there is that ultimately it's a policy. And so the SU is responsible for voting on the policy. And so we have that task force put together because we own the responsibility. But then recognizing that we need an external task force because as a bunch of SU members, we don't know everything. So in fact, one would argue that we don't know very much at all, which is why we've had all these other listening tours. And so we'll bring it to the external task force for their input and review and help so that when we bring the policy to the SU, it is the best representation of what we need.
And then are there multiple external groups?
No, I think well, just yeah, well, the administrative team acted as a group, but then you've got this other external staff and community group that sort of serving as a third group. But I think what Nikki's talking about now is once the policy gets into draft form, I think that, you know, that administrative staff, community member, external group could be sounding board for that policy and give feedback back to the. That's how I'm seeing it unfold, Nikki. Am I right?
Yeah, that's what I tried to say.
I totally heard a lot of that.
Mark, no, you do not need to be available tomorrow at 5.
No, you do not.
All right, thanks.
Nobody on this call needs to be available at 5 tomorrow. I'm just going to introduce Jameson and Ariel, and Nikki, if you want to jump on at the very beginning, that's fine. But then I'm just going to sign off. Part of the thinking here, Colleen, was that we didn't want this, the staff and community members to be suppressed by administrative think or board think. So that's why Jameson and Ariel are going to meet with that group without administrators around, without board members around, so that they can sort of express their real thoughts about where they think this community is with respect to racism and the recognition of racism and what we need to do going forward with that. So
I think that's great. I think that's what I understood was going to be happening and just was trying to clarify it. I did have a couple of questions come to me from one parent, and well, I may check in with Nikki offline on that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep, sounds good.
And then get to me if you need to, Colleen.
Yep.
Okay, 2 hands are raised. Elizabeth first, then Rebecca.
I wanted to say a couple of things. One is that there's a really great article in the Mountain Times about our work with the righting wrongs people, but also that I am, as a representative-elect, I am now part of the Social Equity Caucus, and they do a lot of work with Ariel and Jameson. And Ariel and Jameson are trying to get their template for this policy passed as a statewide, I think it would be really helpful actually, passed as a statewide policy so that, we could have one statewide cluster of supervisory unions passing this policy at the same time.
Yeah.
And Scott, in response to what you have in the chat thing, it's actually all the same people working on all the same thing at the same time. So fear not, it'll all become clear. But I think there's a nice push all across the state to get this done.
And to your point, Elizabeth, too, the Southeast superintendents have an annual get-together with the legislators, as you've already been invited, Elizabeth, to that. It's mid-December sometime. But it's interesting you just said that, because one of the asks of those representatives is that there be some sort of a statewide template so that people aren't all just shooting in the dark, but that there's some leadership at the statewide level. So that's music to my ears, and I think that'll be great for you to bring that word to the area superintendents, because they don't want to go off and all do this independently of one another.
I will be glad to defer to Coach Christie on that, because he's really been leading the charge on this.
Perfect.
Thank you for that update, Elizabeth. That's really exciting that it's moving to a statewide level.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it'll make things a lot easier, actually.
Very. Again, like what David said, is that it feels like we're all, this group here and this group there, and not necessarily talking to each other as well as we could. And if it was on the whole state, because I know we're all having this conversation at varying degrees. Rebecca?
I just wanted to ask David if I can be sent an invite for the administrative meeting.
Yeah, well, I think what happened, Rebecca, and yeah, we'll get you in that loop the next time. I think what happened is you're a board member, so I think that internal group is where you're going to rest. And
she started right like the day after we had our last.
Yeah,
meeting.
I think that's what happened. And I thought about inviting you to tomorrow night's group, but the idea was no board members, no administrators at that group. So I think we'll catch you up the next time the internal group gets together. And Nikki, I think that, we need to make sure that with Rebecca, because it's true. You came in, I think Elizabeth is exactly right. You came in, I think the day after they had that first meeting with the board members did, but you are on the list.
I'll make sure you're on there, Rebecca. That's it for me.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions, or can we move on since it's now 9:01?
Yeah, David, didn't we just agree just a few minutes ago to December 7th?
I thought we agreed to December 14th because a couple of people couldn't make it on the 7th.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know where we're at.
Yeah, it's the 14th, and you should have gotten the invite.
Yeah, I did. All right.
That's going to get Elizabeth there.
Thank you, Scott.
We're not going to let her get away with not voting on the SU budget.
Next up, we have a COVID update.
Yeah, and that could be fairly brief. You know, we had built in the remote week, and in some ways, given the case count in the state and also even locally, Windsor County has increased, you know, fairly significantly. And we did have another, as I announced the other day, we had a staff member and a student in 2 different buildings. So I think getting this extra week where we can air out the buildings, get a little bit deeper clean going on, and also have people not as exposed to one another as they might be when we start back next Monday. I think that worked in our favor. And a matter of fact, we're going to get some feedback on this remote week at the end of this week. And if it went reasonably well and people felt the remote teaching instruction, teaching and learning was of a better quality than it was last March when we did this within 24 hours, then we may contemplate this around Christmas time as well. I think part of it is just kind of watching those trends and that data as it moves forward. The interesting word that we got last week, and you've probably all heard this, but you know, they're expecting that 100% of the people who want a vaccine will be able to be vaccinated by summertime of that would be the summer of 21. That's a projection, and of the ones I just saw a statistic today that right now, and this might have been I forget who did the poll, whether it was Gallup or whoever did the poll, said that right now only 60% of the adult community is saying that they would want to be part of this first round of vaccination. So I don't know what that means, and I don't know that the vaccinations are the end all be all, but essentially I think people are feeling at least there is some light at the end of the tunnel as we get closer to a vaccine. I think that's it from a school perspective. I saw Nikki's hand.
Nikki, did you want to comment?
Yes, sorry, I was chasing my mic up and down. So I had an epiphany in my own head, and so I wanted to share it with you guys. I realized some point last week that I'm super excited about the vaccine coming out, and I feel like there's somewhat of a light at the end of the tunnel. But they haven't even started testing the vaccine in children yet. So while us adults may feel that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, we're in charge of educating children. And I have heard absolutely no timeline for when we may be able to vaccinate the kids. So it was, I was excited, and then I kind of got stopped in my tracks. So I just wanted to put that all in your head too.
Oh, that's a good point.
Wow, thank you.
I do think that our supervisory union, and this is the credit goes to the administrative team, this board, the staff, a lot of districts are still fighting to get back 5 days a week. You have a lot of people on these hybrid AB days or some other model that doesn't have the kids in school every single day. I think one of the things this board can be proud of is that, you know, when we are in person, all those kids who want to be in school, albeit for the first semester, are able to be in school 5 days a week. And I think that that's a tribute to the staff and the administrative team. It is not easy, and there's still a lot of fear and trepidation on the part of many staff members, especially as the case count increases, and the stories about how unpredictable COVID can be in terms of symptoms. Some people get none. Some people are sick for a couple of days and they're okay, and other people have to be hospitalized, and that's scaring the life out of adults who are working with our kids every single day. And I give them credit. I think they're heroes on the ground, and that goes for some of the principals who are on this call today. And they don't flinch, and they do the work well.
Thank you, David. Nancy, you had your hand up for a moment.
Yes, I don't know how, after what David said, if I should even mention it, but we've done very well with our in-person to 12:30, and I don't understand why we don't go full day. That's my question.
Yeah, I think Nancy, that's a good question, and just so you know, that is we're sort of looking at that semester turn, because that's when we were going to let kids who are remote have a choice to come back in person, and that's when we've had some in-person folks who might want to go remote, because some of those parents are maybe getting more and more nervous as the case count goes up. So we're using that January 22nd date as a time to really make that turn, and that would also be the date we would consider, if not a full day, a longer day. And part of why it's not a full day right now is because if we're going to stay and this is complicated, but I'll make it simple. If we're going to stay in the pod structure where teachers are wrapped around kids in these small pods, you have to give teachers time for some planning time and for a duty-free lunch. And right now, the way we're scheduled in pods, and we have to have all hands on deck for those pods, including our unified arts teachers, it's hard to provide that time. So right now, that time's being provided after 12:30. Could we extend some more time? We could. And I think, Nancy, we're really hoping we can do that. But I will tell you, it's a long and stressful day for the people who are doing it, even when they are done, well, quote unquote, done with in person at 12:30. And I really felt, and Christine's on the line, and I'm sure others could, I really felt that by the time we were getting ready for the Thanksgiving break, people had, I'm talking staff now, paraprofessionals and professionals, were really at a point of COVID fatigue where they were just at the end of it. And we were seeing absentee rates increasing. We were seeing anxiety levels. We were having sometimes stressful breakdowns of teachers, tears, angst, gnashing of teeth. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is all real. So I think it's balancing that, Nancy, against can we go a little longer? Because we do much better when the kids are in the building, with the kids. So that's going to be critical to do that.
Rebecca?
I also want to just put a plug in for our teachers. It's a tough time, and I'm sure that it is extremely challenging and difficult. They have families, and with numbers going up with COVID, I just want to put a plug in for what they're doing, and I want to thank them, and the principals and David, all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rebecca. I mean, the banks now have closed down lobbies, right? So it's only drive-through business. We have restaurants that can only operate at 25% capacity, and we're trying to do 100% capacity in our schools. And I appreciate those comments. And Nancy, I don't take your comment as any disrespect for teachers. We all agree we'd like to get those kids in for a longer period of time, mostly because we do a better job in person than we do remote. So that's the goal here.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Given the fact that it's almost 9:15, would people be okay if we pushed policy review audit and cycle to our next meeting and discuss?
That's a quick update. Yeah, we can do that.
Agenda items. Elizabeth has asked that at our next meeting, the next full meeting, not our budget meeting that's only going to be for 15 minutes, that we discuss looking at SU boundaries. And are you talking, Elizabeth, about expanding, like combining?
Yeah, I think that I hear that it's going to be discussed at the State Board of Education, and I think it might behoove us to take that discussion back up before they start talking about it up there.
Get in front of it, as they say.
It's always been an interesting discussion.
Recall, if you will, that David was going to reach out to Woodstock just before the COVID-19 hit, and then it got dropped. And so now that things are, I mean, they're not more settled, it's not a good time to do it, but it's a better time than it was in March to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Woodstock's no longer an SU though, right?
Woodstock is...
They're a district now, aren't they?
You know, I think they still
They
have...
are a district. They were a, we can't make you understand, combined, they had, I can't remember what.
They're a unified district. Aren't they
Central. Now they're one district.
Yeah.
I thought they still had an outlier town. Maybe not.
No, Barnard folded in.
Oh, Barnard folded in. Okay, so they're a district now. Yeah. And Elizabeth's right. I reached out to them, and I reached out to Hartford, and there was one other one that I reached out to. I forget, but yeah. And then COVID hit, and we stopped. So we can generate conversation about that at some point.
Okay, and also Elizabeth is asking for possible SU or student reps on the SU board, and time for an executive session. Are there any other items?
So those items, I know Wendy's still on. Those items then, if I understand it correctly, would be part of our December 28th SU meeting, correct?
Yes.
And policy review audit.
Yeah, policy review and an update on the anti-racism task force.
Yep, that's perfect. Yep. So the only agenda item for the 14th will be the approval of the supervisory union FY22 budget.
So are we all discussing our local budgets at our next local meetings?
Yes.
Do you think it might be, could we just have a very brief, not long discussion about whether locally it was a hard discussion or an easy discussion, just making use of our SU relationships?
What do you mean?
Right now, Elizabeth?
No, I mean at the next meeting.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
How that discussion went, that's all I mean.
Oh, yeah.
I had the same idea.
How that discussion went.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, so kind of SU and local budget update.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
And there's still a question about whether town meetings will be in person or whether they'll be electronic, right?
Exactly. And that's already somewhat nightmarishly being discussed in town clerk offices. I think there's more gray hair here, but
hang on tight.
Hey, why not? So without, I think that's going to be a very, very full budget or no, very full,
Meeting on the 28th.
yeah, a very full agenda. So I think that's probably good. Does anyone have anything else that they want to bring up this evening? Given that it's almost 20 after 9. Hearing none, seeing no hands raised, I think. Let me just make sure. Okay. Whew. I will take a motion to adjourn this. This has been a really good discussion, so thank you, everyone. And we really needed to talk, and thank you, Larry, for giving us more information on everything that we're doing technology-wise. I think we're the best SU in the state.
We'll take that.
So I will take a motion to adjourn.
So,
and Wendy, if you could
Second.
hang up, don't leave, Wendy.
Okay, so Nancy made that motion, Nikki made the second,
Seconded.
and we're all in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Everyone, take care. I'll see you on the 14th.
Bye for
Great.
now.